When we last left the least friendly members of Infinity War, they seemed to be hopelessly adrift in space, and things were looking pretty grim. Tony Stark was leaving a sad voicemail for Pepper Potts, while Nebula looked filled with angst as usual. We began to wonder how Tony and Nebula would escape, or if they even would. But we have a whole bunch of new questions about their roles in Endgame, based on the latest trailer. When we last left our heroes, Tony Stark and Nebula specifically, things didn't look too great. Tony was lamenting the loss of food and water and the impending loss of oxygen. We know that guy sure does love to complain. Meanwhile, Nebula was looking like her usual grim self. Tony has escaped some pretty precarious situations before, so for him to be losing hope proves how dire things have gotten. After we saw him sign off on his message to Pepper Potts, we immediately started wondering how he was going to get back to Earth. Would Tony make it home, or was it his fate to fade away adrift in the wasteland of outer space? Oh wait, yeah, they're back already. There have been rumors going around that the trailers for Endgame are only going to contain the first 15 to 20 minutes of footage from the film. This seems to make sense from the perspective of Marvel Studios, who don't want to give away too much of their movie. But when asked about this rumor, Marvel Studios head Kevin Feige would only call it somewhat accurate. He added that the only reason they put out trailers is to drum up excitement for the movie, not to spoil the plot, which we just refuse to accept. Based on Kevin Feige's statement, it does seem like most of the footage from the trailers takes place sooner rather than later in the movie, and since we've seen Tony and Nebula walking around with the rest of the Avengers and Rocket Raccoon, it looks like they'll be getting back sooner than we originally thought. But how? We're guessing Tony Stark tried everything possible before resigning himself to defeat and recording his farewell message to Pepper Potts. So it seems natural to suspect he had some help from an outside party. In the comic books, Pepper Potts does have her own suit and goes by the name Rescue when she wears it. Despite her chastising Tony about heading into outer space, could she do so herself in order to save him? As far as theories go, this one seems like a stretch. We've only seen Pepper Potts wear Tony's armor briefly, and there's no evidence she's qualified for the kind of space travel that rescuing Tony would require. And then there's the newcomer to the scene, Captain Marvel. She has a history of space travel, and when we last saw her, she was heading off for intergalactic adventures. Some fans theorize that she might bump into Tony and Nebula on her way to answer the call of Nick Fury. But the mid-credit scene of Captain Marvel seems to show that this is not the case. We see Carol Danvers show up asking where Fury is, and she's all by her lonesome. If she had stopped to rescue Tony or Nebula, wouldn't they be with her during this scene? There's also another hero capable of interstellar travel, and that is Thor. Using Stormbreaker, he's able to summon the power of the Bifrost, which can take him wherever he wants to go. During Infinity War, we saw him use this power to transport himself, Rocket, and Groot to Wakanda to join the fight against Thanos. Between Thor and Captain Marvel, we definitely have the capability to save Tony Stark and Nebula. The only issue is finding them. So we know that Tony and Nebula are going to make it to Earth and suit up with the rest of the team, but this raises some interesting questions. Tony Stark's long been the de facto leader of the Avengers for quite some time, but things have changed since the Avengers first assembled. During Captain America Civil War, Helmut Zemo succeeded in tearing apart the Avengers and altering their dynamic forever. At the end of the movie, we saw that there was still hope for Tony Stark and Steve Rogers patching up their relationship, but things remained tense. During their time apart, Steve Rogers went rogue and commanded his own team on his own missions. How's he going to feel about the possibility of taking orders from Tony again? Any sort of power struggle is going to weaken the team considerably. We definitely learned that lesson from Civil War. And after the decimation, the team's already at a huge disadvantage going into the fight against Thanos. Many fans believe we could be losing either Tony Stark, Steve Rogers, or both during this movie. The relationship between these two characters has developed a lot since they first met, and Steve didn't hold Tony in very high esteem. When the pair united during the Avengers, Steve basically accused Tony of not being willing to sacrifice himself for others. He told Tony he wasn't the sort of person to lay on a wire and let others crawl over him. Tony responded that he would have just cut the wire, and Steve accused him of taking the easy way out. Both heroes accused each other of not truly being heroes in ways that matter and only relying on the super soldier serum or a suit of armor. However, they've definitely come to respect each other much more since then. During Civil War, Tony said that he had considered Steve to be a friend. And then we have Nebula, who has many skills, but playing well with others isn't really one of them. It took 2 whole movies for her to even be okay with her own sister, and she hasn't exactly been shown warming up to anyone else in the MCU since then. We're not blaming Nebula for being the way she is. She was the kid who bore the brunt of Thanos' anger for years. Nobody likes to disappoint their parents, and most of our parents don't replace their own body parts with robot ones when we screw up. Jeez. Nebula has a surprisingly big role to play in the comics that Infinity War and Endgame are loosely based on. She's the one who manages to get the Infinity Gauntlet away from Thanos, but she pretty much only gets her mitts on it because he abandons it once he causes the decimation. Yes, she uses it to undo the decimation, but not out of any sense of righteousness or justice. She just does it because she knows it'll make Thanos angry, and at the end of the day, there's nothing she wants more than to make her dad mad. In her defense, in the Infinity Gauntlet storyline, Thanos doesn't just decimate her as he does to everyone else. He traps her in a state of eternal waking death. Unlike most of the characters who fall neatly into good or bad categories, Nebula is mostly an unknown. She's gone from being a flat-out villain to being mostly manageable as long as everyone's trying to take down Thanos. Because she's such an unknown variable, the comic book heroes decide she must be defeated and the Infinity Gauntlet taken away from her. Even Thanos is on their side and works to get the Infinity Gauntlet away from his least favorite child. But Nebula could be a surprisingly useful character if she can get along with the rest of the team. She knows Thanos better than anyone, which is as unfortunate as it is useful. If our heroes need to predict what Thanos is going to do or where he might be, Nebula's most likely going to have some answers. And Nebula and Tony could be an interesting pair if they do end up spending some extended time together. Nebula has long felt like an outsider, and Tony Stark isn't exactly the easiest person to get along with. Even Nick Fury worried he was too difficult to be a valuable part of his Avengers initiative, but Tony Stark is a whiz with technology, and Nebula is half machine, so maybe they'll be able to find some common ground between the two of them. And then there's the fact that both Tony and Nebula have been carrying around a tremendous amount of pain and guilt. Tony Stark has done some questionable things in his life, and his actions have had some unintended consequences. The dark side of Stark Industries was pretty much the plot of the first Iron Man movie, and while Tony has saved the day before, he's also made it worse. He takes full blame for the events of Age of ULTRON, but it's kinda hard to disagree with him on that one. While Steve Rogers once accused Tony of not caring what happens to other people, he's proven time and time again that that's not the case. Not only does he risk his own life to save others, but he takes any failures, real or perceived, to heart. And after watching Peter Parker fade away at the end of Infinity War, his morale has to be at an all-time low. Although Tony did everything possible to stop the decimation, and Peter would have perished whether he was involved or not, you just know it had to hit Tony hard. We know a lot less about the MCU version of Nebula than we do about Tony Stark, but she's another character with some considerable darkness in her past. There was a time when Nebula served Thanos and his minion Ronan the Accuser. We can't imagine her past career as an assassin has left her feeling totally thrilled about the things she's had to do. In addition, she spent years despising and resenting Gamora, who proved to be a loving sister to her after all this time. It seems as though Nebula has been acting out of blind rage against Thanos and hasn't given herself time to grieve. So, we have Nebula, who's too busy trying to take down Thanos to process her emotions, stuck in space with the man who takes the weight of the world on his shoulders. Nebula has been struggling to be vulnerable in her relationship with Gamora, and now she's stuck coping with the pain of her loss. Tony might be one of the few people on Earth or anywhere else in the galaxy who can understand what she's going through. Even at her best, Nebula can come across as pretty callous and even abrasive. She's pretty much only interested in talking about tearing down Thanos, and she isn't much for social pleasantries. Not only can Tony Stark relate to what she's going through, but he's less likely to take offense to her than many other characters would be. Tony also knows that a group of heroes united is much stronger than people struggling on their own. If anyone's going to be able to bring Nebula into the fold of the MCU's heroes, it seems like it's going to be Tony Stark. The hero who was deemed to be too volatile, self-obsessed, and narcissistic to be a part of the Avengers initiative. Hey, Nick Fury does know a lot of things, but he isn't right 100% of the time. Also, since he was one of the victims of the decimation, it's going to be up to someone else to bring everyone together to take down Thanos once and for all. It'll be interesting to see how Tony's relationship with Nebula will develop, and how he'll react to working with his old friends once more. How do you think Tony Stark and Nebula are going to get back to Earth during Avengers Endgame? And what will their roles be once they get there? Share your predictions with us in the comments section below, and then click on that subscribe button for more videos from us here at CBR. Thanks for watching.